There was once a liquor from France that the German sort of didn't want that liquor to be sold in the market, and they used as an excuse that Germans were used to drink beer, low percentage of alcohol, or these very high German shots, basically. And this French liquor was in the middle, and that was not good.
Yeah, and it's important to reflect on the things you do well as well. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the FSR Policy Briefcase with me, James Kneebone.
And me, Leonardo Meeus.
So today we have a slightly different episode. Essentially, it's almost a year since the commission, this College of Commissioners took office. And not only that, there was also Draghi's competitiveness report roughly a year ago. There have been a couple of key events that have kind of marked this date in the timeline. And Leo and I thought it worthwhile that we get together and have a bit of a chat about how things have essentially been going over the past year towards implementing the key elements of Draghi's report. He really emphasized speed and doing things quickly and making sweeping changes. So already in the first year, we should expect something to have changed. But of course, the world around us has continued to change very rapidly as well. So we want to reflect on how relevant the Draghi's report still is and sort of what we can expect moving forward. But not only that, Ursula von der Leyen has also been very vocal. We've had the State of the Union address last week, and Leo himself was at an event with both Mario Draghi and Ursula von der Leyen just a couple of days ago, the 1 year after the Draghi Report event. So we thought we'd get his insights from it, hot off the press, and just go over a few of those issues. How does that sound, Leo?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So we're very lucky, and I'm very lucky to be on the table with somebody so in the know. So I will get straight into it. So I wanted to get your impression of essentially how you see the implementation going to this point for Draghi's competitiveness report. What was his impression of how things were going? So I understand he made a speech, and also von der Leyen's remarks. I mean, what were your big takeaways?
Well, first I had some ideas myself. I tried to prepare, but as you can see, my preparation full of notes.
Okay.
Because it was really interesting. Though, the speeches, if you read these speeches or you listen to them in real life, it's a big difference, I must say.
Okay.
I've never been so close to our president, von der Leyen. Yeah. And I must say she was really giving a nice speech, really inspiring speech. If you're there, you're like, okay, proud to be European, kind of. And I also thought it was nice, the dynamic between the two. I don't know if they set it up like that, but she was giving more a speech of hope, right? We can do this. Yeah. And then he was like, yeah, okay, but
Okay, it's kind of good cop, bad cop. Dynamic.
Yeah. Okay. But respectful and really nice the way they did that. Also because Draghi, one of the points he made is to say, the Commission can only do so much, and I think we will come back to that. But it's really true that in some areas, if we really want to be more competitive, we will need member states to step up and maybe unify a bit more in some areas. So that was really, really interesting. Also, so what happened in that year, right, was the question. So on energy, I think a lot happened. I mean, it's amazing that it's only a year ago that we were talking about this Inflation Reduction Act. Remember that? So we were saying, we have that energy transition, we need to be stronger in clean tech manufacturing, and China is going very fast in some technologies, and Europe has to catch up. And now the US has the IRA, and they will also go faster than us.
Yeah.
Do you know what happened to the IRA?
Yes, exactly. No, it's true. It's amazing how the changing political scene in the US has completely changed the outlook for the IRA. Yeah. I've seen that also just in a very specific field with hydrogen. How it, as you say, it became this massive thing of focus, and now has completely melted away because.
All policy debates in Europe is how can we get the European IRA, how we can get the Euro, and it's gone basically. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but. Not much is left. And even more so, now we are confronted with the US that is becoming is still a partner, but is a partner that not only has made the choice for the moment to not go anymore on that energy transition, to go a bit back to fossil fuels, but is also using their strong position, both in defense, where we seem to be still quite dependent on the US for our protection, and this threat of tariffs are both being used to then put a trade deal on the table where we're supposed to import, massive amount of fossil fuels from the US, right? So imagine a year ago we would be talking about that.
No, exactly, and I think that's maybe a good moment to mention some of what was in von der Leyen's State of the Union address, because she spoke a number of times about the importance of sort of shedding our dependence on Russian fossil fuels. And that's been an objective of the Commission basically since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Repower EU set out a timeline for this. Commissioner Jorgensen set the date of the 1st of January 2028 to try and divest from Russian fossil fuels, but von der Leyen would even like to accelerate that, she said in the State of the Union address. But of course, now Russia is our third biggest supplier of pipeline gas. So, it's fallen from a number one supplier to the third highest supplier. So that's great. And coal imports are virtually zero now. Oil imports are down to 3% from as much as 27% just a few years ago. So a lot going in the positive direction. But as you say, there's a sort of new dependency coming with the US, who are now the EU's largest supplier of liquid natural gas, of course, and we're making this structural pivot towards LNG away from pipeline gas. So there are kind of new dependencies emerging, in that rhetoric.
Yeah, indeed. And some estimate always comes back in these discussions. So it was already mentioned by Professor Draghi in the media. Immediately when the US started with this tariff discussion, right, to increase tariffs for all goods or services from the EU, that's a big problem, but he used that to remind Europe that we still have a lot of internal trade barriers. And it seems to be there is this estimate from the IMF to say that all these internal barriers that we've created ourselves account for something like a 45% tariff on manufactured goods and 110% levy on services, imagine.
Yeah.
So,
crazy.
And he then was stating, but that means that the EU is doing more damage to its economy than the US will ever be able to do. Yeah. And I found it interesting that President von der Leyen quoted the same number in her speech at this conference to sort of a call to action, right? To push forward internal market as one of the ways to improve our industrial competitiveness. And we also picked up on that discussion in our energy panel. Because as you said, I was there, and for me it was a real pleasure to be there, to listen to everyone, because the discussion was really broad. But then I was part of a more energy-focused panel with the Executive Vice President, Ribera, so that was also nice. And beyond that, we had somebody from Eurelectric, the president, also CEO of Fortum, and we had the CEO of the German Steel Association. So, very interesting panel discussion. And there we went into, what can we do more to maybe create then a single energy market, and is that a way to bring down costs?
Yeah, that was a big part of the competitiveness report, right? Was this push to integrate European markets at large, including the energy sector, right?
Indeed. And it's in our discussion, we talked about gas and electricity. So I'm maybe going to call some help now from you, having you here. So on gas, I get the feeling that people think that we went from that importing pipeline gas from Russia to something that is more LNG based, and maybe we will still need some of that, right? Even if we don't follow fully the US doctrine, we might still, we still need it for a while at least.
Sure.
But then the feeling was that the prices will always be high. But some people said maybe we can also do something on gas. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, just to, give a quick explainer on that. I guess, for the benefit of listeners who are maybe on electricity side or whatever. Just in simple terms, liquid natural gas is a structurally more expensive product than pipeline gas, right? Because you have these additional processes to liquefy it, cool it right down to -173 to get it liquid, put it on a ship, bring it over, regasify it, etc. It's structurally a more expensive product. And we became very accustomed to consuming extremely cheap pipeline natural gas coming from Russia. So you have issue there just of a structural difference in the products, right? So that is really hard to shift in a market way without sourcing gas that is even cheaper than, in Yamal in Russia, which is really hard to imagine, right? This is a big part of the argumentation that you came to, which is essentially, we can diversify and we can trade with other partners, and that might help us avoid these extreme peaks like we had in the energy crisis, where you're really leveraged by the fact that you're overexposed to a given supplier. LNG markets tend to be able to be more flexible because, of course, it moves by ship rather than fixed infrastructure. But ultimately, as you say, it's a structurally more expensive product. Europe doesn't have some natural gas fields it can exploit, so you will always be at a disadvantage there, particularly internationally, right? Because if you're trying to compete with the US, with China, with international partners who have good fossil fuel reserves, or continue to receive very cheap fossil fuels from neighbors, as China is doing increasingly, from Russia or India is doing similarly, then you will be at a structural disadvantage. So, that brings it back to that electrification point, right? Which is, and did you get that impression that there was a clear kind of direction of travel towards, competitiveness will come from local electrification? I mean, was that?
A bit, but also that we have some work to do on the gas side. There was clearly this idea, again, discussed, should we maybe do more joint procurement, right?
Yep.
Always comes up,
yep.
Right? Why are we just individually quickly trying to sign deals, or can't we be stronger as Europe and more unified also there to lower gas costs? But indeed, then it was discussed, and I also went in that direction in my intervention, that maybe we should leverage the fact that we are already more unified on electricity markets than any other place in the world, including the US, because the US has electricity markets, but they are relatively small scale. At the level of a state or a few states that got together, but not full scale, right? Neither in infrastructure, neither in market trading rules. And we have that, right?
Yeah, and it's important to reflect on the things you do well as well, isn't it? Because sometimes it can be a bit, self-flagellating, these events, where we go, we're falling behind and we're 100% tariffing. What did you say? 110% tariffs on ourselves? Yeah. I mean, you can start to feel like you're a bit silly, or things are all terrible. But there are many good things going on, and I also think, to go back to the gas point, if there is a pivoting of natural gas flows, from Russia away from Europe and towards China, well, what does that mean? Yeah. China will probably have a much reduced LNG demand, which may create a surplus in the market that could, eventually flow to Europe. Europe would be the largest LNG market then at that point. That gives you, as you say, if you do some joint procurement or try and leverage that a bit more effectively, then that gives you good buying power. Of course, the US has imposed sanctions on China. They're not trading LNG with China anymore. The LNG has to go somewhere. It could come to us. So it's not. There are plenty of reasons also to be, positive, or where we're in a better position sometimes, we think.
Another reason to be positive, I mean, I didn't say that at the conference, but I've been reading some of the history of Europe recently, and in the 80s, we had much more trade barriers, right? So maybe the kind of trade barriers we see today in energy, which are much more technical than those basic barriers we had at that time, will, in 20 years from now, end up in history books thinking like, look at that, how silly was that? I don't know if you know this one, just to give one example, there was always good excuses to have different standards within the EU. There was once a liquor from France that the German sort of protected, they didn't want that liquor to be sold in the market, and they used as an excuse that Germans were used to drink beer, low percentage of alcohol, or these very high, German shots, basically. And this French liquor was in the middle, and that was not good. Yeah. Germans were not ready.
They're not ready for that,
yeah. No, they're really not ready. So it was health reasons.
Public safety.
Yes. So I don't know if some of the debates we currently have, some of the sensitivities will be reduced to that, like, are we sure we want to keep this as it is? To get to that more serious discussion, inspired by these statistics of Draghi and von der Leyen, I looked up some numbers, right, just before the conference. So, just like, for instance, level of interconnectivity in electricity. How much capacity that you consume can you actually import, right? Or how much of your production can be transposed across borders. We have targets on that. So we had a target to say every country should reach an interconnectivity level of 10% by 2020. Then we agreed 15% by 2030. To my interesting surprise, because we don't talk a lot about those targets, is there are 8 member states in 2025 that have not yet reached
The 2020.
2020 target.
Okay.
And only 2 of them are islands. So, I mean, if you're Ireland or Cyprus, I mean...
You get a pass.
But the others... maybe they should read some of those history books, right? But on that, there is good news, because I don't know if you noticed also in the State of the Union speech, but there is talk about this highway initiative.
Sure, yeah. No, it came up, yeah.
And also the grid package, right? So that was already a while that the grid package was on the table, coming soon. But now we also have that highway initiative. So I'm very curious to see how that will push infrastructure forward. Because in the end, prices on electricity on average are maybe high, but we already have a lot of places where we have sometimes too much, and others where there is shortage, right? And it's not at the same time. So I really believe there is a benefit in connecting all of that. And also the electricity market reform, it was negotiated under the previous Commission mandate, but during an energy crisis. And somehow during a crisis, we have a tendency to go a bit national, right? Like, you see that in the reform. I mean, it's a good reform, but on guiding investments, which is important now in electricity to really accelerate investments, member states felt more comfortable to be able to give some national flavor to that, let's say. But I also feel in more recent discussions now, there seems to be a start of some more willingness to maybe unify also a little bit.
I think
this kind of instruments.
One of the lessons taken from the energy crisis, and also you often hear von der Leyen going back to the joint procurement of vaccines for COVID even as well, is that the kind of interconnections between the member states did a lot to sort of lessen the worst impacts of those 2 crises of COVID in the case of sharing of vaccines and joint procurement, and in the energy crisis in the case of sharing supplies, avoiding absolute disconnections, suppliers of last resort, this kind of thing. So it's nice to see that momentum hopefully, continues to hold.
Let's hope so. I also mentioned, because we talked about electrification, what more can we do to accelerate electrification? Because as you said, if gas remains somewhat more expensive than other parts of the world, maybe we should go a bit, stronger on electrification and then bring costs down there. And of course, that involves investing in renewables, investing in grids, and flexibility. But now we're also more and more talking about, can we push the demand side a bit more? Because if we get the whole system ready, but then nobody electrifies, or there is no coordination between the two, that's a pity, right?
Sure.
So then that talks about industry, but also households. And heat pumps is a technology that will be used by both. So I mentioned also this anecdote that I installed a heat pump in our home in Belgium. But then I discovered we are one of the worst places to install a heat pump. I don't know if you've seen the UK Climate Committee report from last summer. No. There is a really nice graph showing the market share of heat pumps in different countries in correlation to the ratio of the price gas electricity.
Okay.
So and that ratio is often determined by taxation and all kind of stuff, right? Okay, It seems to be that in many countries, electricity is still taxed much more than gas. And Belgium and the UK, by the way, are the worst. So we're on the bottom of the graph, both in market share of heat pumps and the ratio. And all the way in then there are some countries in the middle, and the champion is Sweden.
Right.
So Sweden.
And does that also bear out in the data? I mean, they have much higher levels of installations, and
yes. So it's all about taxation, but then we come back to what Draghi said. You cannot expect only the Commission. Member states have to unify, because taxation is one of these areas where there is no qualified majority voting, right? So you need unanimity on all member states, and that's really hard.
No, certainly. And this also came up in von der Leyen's State of the Union address, that, look, if we're going to make this big transformation of our energy systems and our industries, and to be more secure, we have to be more interconnected. And sometimes that requires big decisions to be made quickly, and us to pivot and reposition to new crises or priorities. in this ever-changing political environment that we're in, you need also frameworks that allow for that, right? So she mentioned that there might be a need to move towards qualified majority voting on more issues. She mentioned foreign policy specifically, but I mean, it shows that there's an initiative towards like rethinking these ideas about how these processes can go in order to be able to deliver on this agenda, right? And yeah, I think that was something also in general that came across in this State of the Union. If I think back to last year's, and also we talked on the podcast as well about her political guidelines, right? We did an episode on that. And I do see still like a consistent connecting thread through all of it, right? It does seem like a coherent initiative for a societal transformation that is coherent and ongoing. And yes, there are tweaks here and there, but it's kind of maintained even through many external crises being imposed upon it. And that's quite nice. You mentioned earlier the IRA that completely transformed how we were thinking, but that agenda's been and gone already in this time, but the EU has stayed the course. And I think seeing that consistency and that regulatory sort of reliability and to be able to plan in that sense around a clear agenda has got to be hopefully very encouraging for businesses and also national initiatives that want to align with this kind of vision. I mean, hopefully it's there to stay the course. So yeah, this idea of being more flexible in the decision-making process, also you see mirrored in the new proposed multi-annual financing framework, which is due to begin 2027. Is that right? Yes. The current one's 2021 to 27. So the following MFF is designed in such a way so to have the funds a bit less ring-fenced and be more adaptable to whatever the pressing need is, which is a good way, hopefully, of doing more with what we have. Because this is also something I remember from Draghi's report was like, we are not the world's reserve currency as the US have with the dollar. We do not have necessarily the fiscal capacity to just throw resources here and there. Not to say the EU doesn't have meaningful resources, but to try and maximize what we can do with what we have. Hopefully, a bit more flexibility in the MFF will allow that to happen and to sort of deliver on that agenda. And that's something tangible we see, a real deliverable from over the past 12 months is this new MFF that seems fit for purpose for what's to come for the remainder of this commission. Yeah,
and to connect back to the anecdote I told about when I read the history books with the liquor story, it seems to be at that moment in time when these cases were emerging, there was also a crisis in Europe. So this was also, and at that moment, qualified majority was off the table for everything, right? So and it was like a breaking moment. Like like people were complaining, Europe is not delivering, but not willing to give up their veto, basically.
Yep.
So you cannot do anything, but everybody's complaining you're not doing anything. And I feel we have that moment again, right? On competitiveness, Europe needs to do more. Yeah, okay, but.
You need the tools in the hands of the decision makers.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we're at again a crucial moment in history. Let's hope so, right?
Yes, exactly, and hope that it creates positive transformation. Because of course the more challenging flip side inevitably is that there's increasing pressure from populist alternatives that would attempt to undermine this institutional framework, these governance frameworks, and. It's the job of the incumbent political machine to provide solutions and be able to adapt in order to fend that off, and that's very tough, isn't it? I mean,
and I must say, doesn't matter on which side of the politics you are. I think if today you look at our leadership, you can still call them a role model for the next generation, and you cannot say that in many other places of the world. And I found that striking that many speakers at that conference made that point, right? That Europe, yes, we're here to discuss competitiveness, but we can also be proud of Europe in still holding certain values high, right? And maybe in some areas we're doing a bit less good, but we can still be proud of what we stand for.
Yeah, and von der Leyen, she acknowledged that also in her in her State of the Union address. She said, on some issues we won't be going far enough for some people, and we will be going too far for others, but we try and enact a coherent policy framework that is consistent with the liberal democratic values of the Union. And they, I would agree they do their best to uphold those. So yeah, it seems to be those values and those ideas and those norms, or however you want to call it, that seem to have helped maintain this consistent thread that I was referring to before. From last year's and even from the previous commission even to now, it's not that it's rigid and unbending and won't change and it's fixed and it stays its path. I would like to think that it is evolving and quicker. We've talked about some major institutional changes happening, but underpinned by a set of values that are at the core of that. And I always remember this from the beginning of the Draghi's competitiveness report. I have it in a couple of presentations where he said, Europe is struggling to essentially continue to deliver on the social contract, and that's putting a strain on these liberal democratic principles that we hold dear, that makes Europe what it is. So it's incumbent upon us to protect those by melding our model into one that's fit for purpose for the modern age in order to allow us to continue to do that. So
yes, that's it. I cannot think of anything else. What else did I do at this conference? I took a selfie.
I saw. As you should. This is well, let's see what other celebrity selfies you managed to accumulate over the.
Are you okay to take a selfie with me, James?
With pleasure.
From now on, I do one a day.
I don't think it will get as much traction as a selfie with Vice President Rivera.
If you go into Agri or something.
Let's hope so. All right, guys. Well, I think that was. We just wanted to do a quick recap on these important sort of landmark moments after the looking back on this 1 year after the Draghi Report and the first year on the Commission. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit Leo's anecdotes from his time at the conference. And please, feel free to let us know in the comments or interact with what your interpretations were of how the Commission's getting on delivering on that agenda, and also on the State of the Union address more broadly. Thanks for joining us, Leo, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Check.